There's a question that doesn't get asked often enough in football. Not who will win the trophy, not which striker is in form, or which manager has the best tactical setup. The question is simpler, and in some ways more important than any of those. It's this: will everyone actually show up? 48 teams, 104 matches, 3 countries, 16 cities stretched across a continent. The 2026 World Cup is the most ambitious version of this tournament ever conceived, and the football world has spent years talking about the players, the stadiums, the expanded format, and the commercial scale of what's coming. What it hasn't spent nearly enough time talking about is whether every team that earned the right to be there will actually be able to get there, whether every fan who saved for years to follow their national side across North America will be able to move freely, safely, and without extraordinary difficulty between the cities and countries involved. Because here's what started to emerge in the months leading up to June 2026. For certain nations, certain traveling parties, and certain groups of supporters, the path to this World Cup is not straightforward. It involves visa processes, entry requirements, logistical arrangements, and cross-border complications that simply did not exist at previous tournaments in the same way. And when you start pulling on that thread, when you start asking what it actually means for a qualifying nation to send its players, its coaching staff, its officials, and its supporters to a tournament hosted across 3 countries with 3 different sets of entry rules, the picture becomes genuinely complicated. Now, before we go any further, let's be precise about what this is and what this isn't. No national federation has officially announced a boycott of the 2026 World Cup. No team has withdrawn. The tournament is proceeding, but the conversations happening inside football, in confederation offices and player associations, in the travel and logistics networks that move national teams around the world are real, and they matter. Because the history of this sport tells us that the gap between a logistical concern and a genuine crisis can close faster than anyone expects. So let's start at the beginning. Let's understand what FIFA actually committed to when it awarded this tournament to the United 2026 bid, and what those commitments mean in practice. When a country, or in this case 3 countries, bids for the World Cup, it signs a host country agreement with FIFA. That agreement is not a casual document. It runs to hundreds of pages. It covers stadium specifications, infrastructure requirements, broadcasting arrangements, accreditation processes, security protocols, and critically, guarantees around the ability of all participating nations to enter the host country and compete. FIFA does not simply trust that a host nation will behave in a manner consistent with the global, inclusive spirit of the tournament. It requires formal legal commitments. The United 2026 bid made those commitments. The United States, Canada, and Mexico each signed off on arrangements that are supposed to guarantee open, non-discriminatory access for every team that qualifies through sport. Every team, without exception. That's the principle on which the modern World Cup operates, and it's the principle FIFA has staked its credibility on defending. Here's where things get interesting. Because guaranteeing access in principle and delivering access in practice are 2 very different things. And right now, for a small number of qualified nations, the practical delivery of that guarantee is genuinely uncertain. The issue at its core is not a single dramatic policy or formal exclusion. It's something more diffuse, and in some ways more difficult to resolve. It's a combination of visa processing timelines, entry requirements changes, diplomatic complications between certain pairs of countries, and the sheer administrative complexity of moving a national football program, players, coaches, medical staff, analysts, equipment, and all the rest, across international borders in a compressed tournament schedule. Think about what it actually takes for a national team to arrive at a World Cup. Weeks before the tournament begins, advanced parties travel to inspect training facilities. Technical staff arrive to set up equipment. Medical teams bring specialized supplies. Accreditation must be arranged for dozens of individuals. Hotels must be booked. Transport must be coordinated. And all of this, for every team from every corner of the world, must flow through entry points controlled by host nation immigration systems. At a single host World Cup, France 1998, Germany 2006, Brazil 2014, this is complicated enough. At a 3-country tournament, covering the United States, Canada, and Mexico, teams will potentially be moving across international borders multiple times during the group stage alone. A team drawn into a group with matches in a Canadian city and an American city must navigate 2 separate national entry processes, 2 sets of documentation requirements, and 2 sets of accreditation systems. For most teams, this is a manageable inconvenience. For some, it's a genuine operational challenge. FIFA has been working on this. The Joint Host Committee, the body coordinating across all three nations, has established protocols intended to smooth cross-border movement for accredited tournament participants. There are supposed to be dedicated entry lanes, pre-cleared accreditation systems, and coordination mechanisms between border agencies. In theory, the infrastructure exists to make this work. But let's bring in some history here, because this isn't the first time the World Cup has grappled with questions about access, entry, and the political or logistical realities of hosting. Cast your mind back to 1978. Argentina hosted the World Cup under a military government, and the question of whether certain nations would participate and under what conditions was live right up to the tournament itself. The football went ahead, but the legacy of that tournament carries the shadow of those circumstances to this day. Think about 1994, the last time the United States hosted the World Cup. That tournament was, by most measures, a logistical success. The venues were excellent, the organization was smooth, and the football delivered memorable moments. Maradona's extraordinary early performances before his suspension, Roberto Baggio's missed penalty in the final. But 1994 was a very different geopolitical moment from 2026. The world was different. The number of teams was 24, not 48. The complexity was smaller. The number of nations with complicated diplomatic relationships with the United States was, in relevant ways, more manageable. Now we have 48 teams. The world is more fragmented, and the number of nations for whom traveling to and through the United States involves genuine administrative uncertainty has grown. That's not a political statement, it's an operational reality that FIFA's logisticians are working through right now. There are specific cases that illustrate the issue more concretely than abstract generalization can. Iran qualified through the AFC process. Sporting merit, full stop. They earned their place. The question of how an Iranian team and its traveling support actually navigate entry to the United States, accreditation processes, and cross-border movement during the tournament has not been publicly resolved in a clear and comprehensive way. FIFA has stated that all qualified teams will participate. The formal mechanisms are supposed to be in place. But the detail, the actual operational reality of what happens when the Iranian squad lands at an American airport is something that football's governing body has not communicated with the transparency that the situation arguably demands. Iran is not the only case. There are other nations from different parts of the world for whom the combination of diplomatic complexity and entry process uncertainty creates real operational concerns. The specifics vary. The common thread is that for these teams, the path to participation involves a layer of uncertainty that teams from Western Europe, South America, or North America simply do not face. And this is the part that matters most when you think about it not as an administrative question, but as a human one. Imagine being a player who has spent 4 years of your life in pursuit of this moment. You've played through qualifiers in monsoon conditions and summer heat. You've flown overnight for away games in distant corners of your confederation. You've given up club seasons, managed injuries, fought through selection battles. And now you've made it. Your country is in the World Cup. And somewhere in the weeks before you travel, there's a conversation happening between your federation, your government, FIFA's legal teams, and host nation authorities about the paperwork that will determine whether you can actually get on the plane. That's not a hypothetical. That's the reality some players are living right now. For fans, the situation is even more acute. National football associations can, in extremis, manage logistics that their players cannot individually resolve. The federation has resources, relationships, and official status. Individual supporters don't have any of that. A fan from Tehran or from Havana or from Pyongyang, and yes, North Korea participated in qualification rounds, who wants to follow their team to a World Cup is navigating a visa process as a private individual with no institutional support. For many such fans, the 2026 World Cup in North America is simply not accessible. Not because they don't want to be there, because the practical barriers are insurmountable. This matters to the spirit of the tournament in ways that go beyond logistics. The World Cup is, at its best, a genuinely global event. The stands at previous tournaments have been full of color and noise from every corner of the planet. The sound of a stadium when Nigeria scores, or when South Korea equalizes in the final minutes, or when Morocco beats a European giant, that sound comes from supporters who traveled thousands of miles and navigated real difficulties to be there. When those supporters cannot come, something is lost from the tournament that no amount of commercial spectacle can replace. So what is FIFA actually doing about this, and what happens if the concerns don't get resolved to everyone's satisfaction? FIFA's position, stated repeatedly and clearly, is that the host country agreements are legally binding, that all qualified nations will participate, and that the logistical mechanisms are in place to deliver that outcome. The organization has been working with all three host nations on accreditation systems, cross-border movement protocols, and entry clearance arrangements for teams and officials. There are also contingency considerations that FIFA doesn't broadcast publicly, but that would be on the agenda of anyone doing serious operational planning. If a team faced entry barriers that prevented their participation, even at a late stage, FIFA would face a situation without a clean precedent in the modern era of the tournament. The replacement mechanisms, the sporting integrity questions, the legal implications of the host country agreement, all of that would land simultaneously. It's the scenario FIFA is working hardest to avoid, precisely because the consequences would be severe. The realistic best case, and this remains the most probable outcome, is that the tournament proceeds with all 48 qualified nations participating, that accreditation and entry systems function as designed, and that the operational complexity proves manageable even for the teams with the most difficult logistics. FIFA has been preparing for this for years. The host committees have been working through scenarios. The mechanisms exist. There is genuine reason to believe they will work. The realistic concern is not a single dramatic collapse, but a gradual erosion of the tournament's universal character. Not a formal boycott, but an accumulation of smaller difficulties, a delayed accreditation, a complicated entry process, a fan group that can't travel, a support staff member who can't get a visa in time, that together create a tournament that is less fully global than the one FIFA has promised. That's a harder thing to address. It doesn't generate a single headline. It happens slowly, in the background, and its effect is felt most acutely by the people with the least institutional power. FIFA has one tool that it hasn't fully deployed yet, which is radical transparency. The organization could publish in detail the entry and accreditation arrangements for every participating nation. It could specify exactly how cross-border movement will work for teams playing in both Canadian and American cities. It could explain, clearly and publicly, what happens if a team faces entry difficulties. That level of transparency would serve multiple purposes. It would reassure fans who are currently uncertain about whether to invest in travel plans. It would hold host nations publicly accountable to their agreements. And it would demonstrate that FIFA is on top of a situation that right now feels somewhat opaque from the outside. There are genuine reasons for optimism about 2026. The venues are extraordinary. The football itself, 48 teams, an expanded knockout format, more matches, more stories, more moments of genuine sporting drama, has the potential to be the greatest version of this tournament ever staged. Canada and Mexico, as we've discussed, have brought real energy and operational credibility to their portions of the hosting arrangement. And the United States, whatever the complications, provides a commercial and logistical infrastructure that no other host nation on Earth could match. But great football and a great tournament are not the same thing. A great tournament is one where everyone who qualified gets to play, where every fan who wants to come has a realistic path to being there, and where the universal, inclusive spirit of the World Cup survives contact with the complexities of the real world. That's what's at stake in the months between now and the opening match at the Azteca in June. I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective on this. If you were planning to follow your national side to 2026 and you knew that the logistics around entry and accreditation were uncertain, would that change your plans? Would it change how you felt about the tournament itself? Tell me in the comments. This is exactly the kind of question that deserves more than a press release from FIFA and a few lines of reassurance from the host committees. What do you think FIFA's single most important action should be between now and the opening match? More transparency? Clearer legal commitments from host nations? Direct engagement with the federations most affected? I'd be curious to know where you'd put the pressure. And if this is the kind of football conversation you've been looking for, the one that goes beyond the squad announcements and the transfer rumors and actually asks what kind of tournament we're going to get, then subscribe. There's more of this to come, and the story is still developing. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a test of what the sport actually believes about itself, and 2026 is going to be one of the most revealing tests it has ever faced.